It's funny how thoughts seem to converge together at times. While I was working on the Thinking Positive video, E3 was going on, and one of the games that was shown was the new Legend of Zelda game, Breath of the Wild. Now this in and of itself didn't get my attention so much, as cool as it is. No, what got me thinking was a video by gaming journalist and commentator Jim Sterling. In his video, Sterling takes producer Eiji Aonuma to task for his answers to a familiar question: when would we get a female Link? Now, 2 disclaimers before we continue. The first is that Jim Sterling is considered to be a shock jock of sorts of gaming journalism, so I link this here with the warning that the language could be considered unsavory to some. Nor is this a commentary on Sterling's style or his dismissal of Aonuma's quotes per se. Secondly, I'm not attempting to put words in Aonuma's mouth in an attempt to defend him. Rather, it's an attempt to understand what Aonuma's point is based on the symbolism and narrative themes already present in the Zelda universe. I do think Aonuma would do himself a service if he explained these ideas in more detail, as his quotes look like the type that supposes a knowledge that we simply don't have. In any event, let's look at the first of these quotes. In the GameSpot interview, Aonuma says, when asked about a female Link, "We thought about it and decided that if we're going to have a female protagonist, it's simpler to have Princess Zelda as the main character. If we have Zelda as the main character who fights, then what is Link going to do?" I think the key to understanding this quote is to think about the typical pattern of Zelda games in terms of narrative. Evil shows up and threatens the land. Zelda's tireless efforts to stave off this evil include recruiting Link to gather the necessary MacGuffins to finally overcome evil. In this dynamic, Zelda is actually the most powerful figure in the gaming series. I mean, it's named after her and all. Zelda possesses the Triforce of Wisdom. She is the personification of good. She's the one who recognizes the evil most quickly, often long before even the King of Hyrule catches wind of the evil. She is usually the first to identify the hero of destiny, i.e. Link, and that identification is the first real confirmation of Link's true role in the narrative. Link, on the other hand, is the X Factor, the wild card, the boy from nowhere who, at the last moment, suddenly becomes the champion everyone needs. His entire journey is designed to strengthen him to the point where he can finally challenge evil. It's particularly interesting to note that throughout the series, Ganon, the antagonist, considers Zelda to be the real threat to his plans, but also the key as well. Link is usually more of a nuisance that is easily ignored and doesn't present a threat, at least until Zelda and Link are reunited and their combined efforts finally thwart Ganon. Even in this case, it is Zelda who is ultimately the one who overcomes evil, having guided Link into the champion needed to vanquish it. This formula has been evolving and played with over the years, but these fundamental elements have been in place for some time. So what does this have to do with Aonuma's quote? Well, I suspect the concern is that if Zelda is given the main role in the adventuring game, that is, The Legend of Zelda, then Zelda is fulfilling the role of both Link and Zelda. Zelda becomes not only the personification of good, but her own wildcard. She becomes, in a word, invincible. Link's role has become trivialized. He's not the Prince of Hyrule, nor does he possess any inherent traits that would distinguish him from Zelda's adoption of both roles as a character. Link becomes unnecessary. This is a big issue for the balance of the Triforce. Zelda becomes all-powerful, and Link has no place in that balance of power. Thus there is no tension, no possibility of good losing. This is bad from many narrative standpoints, to say the least. With this in mind, let's turn to the second quote that Sterling references. The Triforce is made up of Princess Zelda, Ganon, and Link. Princess Zelda is obviously female. If we made Link a female, we thought that would mess with the balance of the Triforce. That's why we decided not to do it. It's interesting to note that Aonuma mentions this balance issue in the GameSpot interview as well, but GameSpot doesn't print what Aonuma said about balance. And since he connects the balance of the Triforce to the concept of making Zelda playable, I wonder if he simply misspoke here. It's entirely possible that he was thinking about making Zelda a playable character and upsetting the balance that way. But for the sake of argument, let's assume that Aonuma meant that changing Link's sex would actually have some impact on the balance of the Triforce. Instead of dismissing this, as Sterling does, let's ask ourselves a question. What impact could changing Link's sex have on the Triforce's dynamic? I can come up with at least one possibility. Aonuma draws an underline on the fact that Zelda is female. This particular notion seems to be important to the balance equation. Zelda is a Hylian. Hylians are the main race of the Zelda series, the people of Hyrule, or the analogous race for humans in the world. Zelda sits at the top of that race due to her royalty. She represents wisdom, power used for good, and the top of a hierarchy, and most importantly for this point, women. Contrast this with Link. He's usually portrayed as a nobody, someone from a small town or island with humble beginnings. In later games he gets his start adventuring not with grand dreams, but simply trying to rescue or help people he knows. He is the everyman, without any real obvious qualities that would stand out. And he is a man. Zelda and Link represent every aspect of the Hylian people. They stand in for every type of Hylian person, from lofty heights of royalty to lowly and humble origins of the rancher, and most importantly the distinction between male and female. This is important because in every narrative Zelda game, all of good in Hyrule eventually rises up against Ganon. Zelda represents all female aspects of Hyrule, Link the male side. Together they represent the balance of all good in Hyrule resisting evil. This also extends to all the other races in these games as well. Zoras, Gorons, and even Kokiri often have a chosen member who is a sage, or otherwise special, to help Link in the hour of need. It's a very Lord of the Rings moment when good from all corners of the kingdom rise up against Ganon. Making Link female messes with this symbolic balance. If Link is female, then men have no participation in good when it comes to the Triforce. Women would have an overrepresentation, from a symbolic standpoint. Changing Link's sex to female arbitrarily without any consideration for this balance damages the symbolism inherent in the games. Now one could ask why not just flip the sexes of all three characters? Well, that's worth considering, but that would also be a huge undertaking without proper consideration of the symbolism inherent in the characters themselves. For example, Zelda possesses the Triforce of Wisdom, and wisdom is typically portrayed in narratives as female. And as we continue to see what changes need to be made, we go even further down a rabbit hole. This is not to say it couldn't be done. In fact, I might find it interesting. But this is one example of why Aonuma might not want to go down this route altogether. It would be easier to shift narrative focus onto Zelda. But then we run into the whole what would Link do problem stated in the first quote. Just a quick disclaimer before I go on. This theoretical exercise is not my attempt to define what Aonuma actually means. I have no idea what Aonuma might be referring to in these quotes. My point is that if one sits down and thinks about the symbolism in the games, it isn't very hard to come up with potential problems from a narrative and symbolic perspective. Now this last bit is not directed at Sterling's video per se, but those who want to have the sex change for Link. To me, the biggest problem with changing Link's sex in such an arbitrary fashion as some have called for is that it's just that, arbitrary. Link is a defined character, like Zelda. Link is who he is. Link is a male because that is what he is. It is an aspect of who the character Link is. And changing that simply to fulfill some desire among the player base is simply pandering. If we are to consider games truly to be art, we have to give creators the space needed to craft their characters. Arbitrarily changing sexes to fulfill a commercial demand without consideration for what that change might do to the art commercializes our art form even further. It robs from games the potential to be that art by pandering to desires in a mass market appeal. Changes like this should happen in the context of the art itself, and it trivializes all aspects of other characters' traits. Because if Link's sex can be changed on a whim, then the characters' identities are no stronger than tissue paper. That's all for now. Thank you, and I'll see you next time.